Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about chord families. First off, if you like the diagrams for everything in this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free eGuide, Music Theory for Guitar. And this eGuide will be something that you can study and use as a reference for years to come. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to just go download it. This is lesson 4.20 from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So in the last few lessons, we've been talking about playing chord progressions that have chords that aren't diatonic to the key. And this lesson, we're going to take a little bit of a detour to talk about something called chord families. And this is really important for setting us up to learn about key modulation that we're going to talk about in the next lesson. And key modulation is changing the key of a song. And this is going to really set us up to learn about that. And this is a really deep subject. You can get really deep into the theory behind this, but I'm just going to touch on it for now and really dive deep into it in our series, Music Theory for Songwriting. But I think it's really important to at least touch on it right now and get the basics of it, because like I said, it's going to help us dive into the next lesson about key modulation. And each step of the major scale has a name. For example, the 1 chord is called the tonic, the 2 the supertonic, the 3 the mediant, the 4 the subdominant, the 5 the dominant, the 6 the submediant, and the 7 the leading tone. But what we really want to focus on right now is the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant. Those are the main chord families in any key. And chord families just have different functions to create different emotions for the listener. And the tonic is your home base. It's your 1 chord. It's where you would start a piece of music or end a piece of music. The subdominant is the 4 chord, which has the function of drawing you away from the tonic towards the dominant. And then the dominant is the 5 chord, which has the function to draw you back to the tonic. So 1-4-5 is such a popular progression because it has such strong movement because of those chord families. The 1 chord is your home base. That's where you start. The 4 chord in this key of C is F, and that draws you away from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, which in the key of C is G. And the 5 chord has a very strong pull back to the 1 chord. That's why a 1-4-5 sounds so good and sounds so strong and is so common. And a 5-7 is the strongest pull back to the 1, turning the 5 chord into its 7th, which becomes a dominant 7, has a much stronger pull back to the 1. And that's called an authentic cadence, from a 5 to a 1. And especially a 5-7 has the strongest pull to the 1. It's something called an authentic cadence, which you don't need to worry too much about that. Just know that a 5 chord has a really strong pull to the 1. And that's a way you can really hear a song ending or changing keys, which we'll get into in the next lesson. Or like I mentioned when we were talking about secondary dominants, when we use the secondary dominant between a chord, for example, if we were in the key of C going to a D minor, if we threw its 5 chord before it, the A7, it created a much stronger ramp going to this D minor. Instead of just going to the D minor, it creates a much stronger pull to the D minor. So those are your 3 main chord families, but every chord can fit within these families, so not just a 1-4-5, and that's called diatonic substitution. And what I mean by that, if we took the key of C major, you know that's just C, D, E, F, G, A, B. If we turned each one into triads, you would end up with a C major, a D minor, E minor, and so on. You know that. These are the notes that are in each of those triads. So these are the notes in the C major triad. These are the notes in a D minor triad, and so on. There are chords that are closely related to the 1-4-5, which are your 3 main chord families. And the thing that makes them so closely related is because they share 2 notes. When you're talking about triads, they each share 2 of the same notes. For example, if we were to take the 1 chord, the tonic, there are 2 chords that can be used as substitutions for the 1 chord because they have 2 of the same notes in those chords. So you're able to switch those chords out and use them as the same function a lot of times. So for the tonic, that's the 3 chord and the 6 chord, because The 3 chord has an E and a G, which the 1 chord has, the tonic, an E and the G. And the 6 chord has a C and an E, which the 1 chord has a C and an E. So the tonic chord, which is the 1, can either be a 1 chord, or you can switch it out for a 3 chord or a 6 chord. So in the key of C, you could either have a C major, an E minor, or an A minor. And if this is confusing, I'm going to talk more about it as we're going through. I just want to start here so you actually know where I'm coming from. And then it's the same for the 4 chord and the 5 chord. The 4 chord can share with the 2 chord. They can both, the 2 chord is in the 4 chords family, the subdominant family, because they both have an F and an A in it. So an F major chord has an F and an A, and a D minor chord has an F and an A. So these chords can be interchangeable. And then for the dominant family, for the triad in the key of C, you have a B and a D. You have the same thing for the 7 chord, a B and a D. So these 2 chords can be interchangeable as well, meaning this 7 chord is in the same family as the dominant family with the 5 chord. So your tonic family has the 1 chord, the 3 chord, the 6 chord. In the key of C, that's a C, E minor, or A minor. Your subdominant family has the 4 chord or the 2 chord. In the key of C, that's an F or a D minor. And your dominant family has a 5 chord or the 7th chord. And in the key of C, that's a G or B diminished. So the reason this is so important for what we're talking about in the next lesson is because using the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant chord families firmly establishes a key. It's the most firm way to establish a key. So if you had a 1, 4, 5, you would firmly establish in the key of C. If it was a C, F, G, you would firmly establish the key of C. And then if you created the 5 as a 7th chord, a dominant 7th, that's going to even create more strong pull back to the 1, which is an authentic cadence, which is important too. That really establishes the key. But it doesn't have to be a dominant, that's just the strongest pull that it has. So the reason that the chords that we're talking about fit in the chord families is because you can replace, if you're playing a 1, 4, 5 in the key of C, which is C, F, G, you could try and replace the F with the 2 chord because the 2 chord fits in the family of the 4 chord. So you could try a C major, D minor, G major, or G7. And it's going to function the same way as it did when this was a 4 chord instead of a 2 chord, because the 2 chord and the 4 chord are in the same chord family. Or we could change out the G7 with the B minor 7 flat 5, which this is supposed to say 7 now, because the 7 chord is in the same chord family as the 5 chord. They both belong to the dominant chord family. So a C major, F major, B minor 7 flat 5 functions in the same way as it did when this was a G7. And you can try that out. Take common chord progressions and try to replace them with chords from the same family and hear how it still functions the same way. And that's not to say that it's always going to work, and especially when you're playing with other musicians, if a piece is written with a certain chord, it doesn't mean that you can just take a chord from the same chord family, plug it in, and it's going to sound right in that situation. Everyone in the band would pretty much need to know what was going on, and everyone could do it. And then that piece is just reharmonized using chords from the same chord family. It's called diatonic reharmonization, which we'll dive into more when we talk about music theory for songwriting. But the main point I want you to get from this lesson is that the 1, 4, 5 are your main chord families. They're the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant. And the other chords fit within those families, which means that they can be interchangeable and function the same way. And if this is still confusing, don't worry. This is really leading us up to the next lesson where I'm talking about key modulation. This was just something important to get out of the way because I didn't want that lesson to be too long. So go ahead, just jump into the next lesson, and I'm going to show you how this all works and why this is important for establishing keys when you're talking about modulation. So go ahead and move on to the next lesson. And be sure to download the eGuide. All these diagrams are in there. And be sure to subscribe because we had at least one new lesson every day.